So I did a session with someone this weekend, and I found that so we don't usually most tutors don't usually focus on question paper two, question one too much, um, depending on the students, of course, because it is very much a continuation of IGCSE, where you take the IGCSE skill that you learned, but you are applying the text analysis that you learned from paper one, and you're applying all the things you learn about how to use language, how to approach language to that writing piece. And then you take that writing piece and then you write a reflective commentary on it. So I want to give a broad overview of that quickly. I'm going to see if I can do that in under 10 minutes. And if I can do it in under 10 minutes, then we can get through everything I need to do today. There is so much that I want to do. So if you have any questions for me, post them in the chat and then I can get back to them today. Like now in our lesson, I just want to so that I know how much time to leave for at the end of the lesson for questions. So I'm going to jump to, we're looking at 993 summer 23 paper 2-2. So that's a May June paper. Just quickly opening, going down there here. So I'm just going to go through the comments on this specific section in the examiner's report. And as I've said before, the examiner's report is honestly, it's the key to improving. Students who do well make use of the examiner's report because they start to notice how copying and pasting other responses and the other ways that other people do things is not going to actually get you the marks. So it says write the text for an opening of your story using. So your question was, your teacher has asked you to write the opening of a story called The Voice about an answer phone message that someone received from a complete stranger. I hope you guys have done so already. Write the text for the opening of your story using no more than 400 words. In your writing, create a sense of drama and suspense. In general, candidates managed the question 1A task quite well, although some attempted to write a whole story rather than a story opening as prescribed in the question prompt. Effective planning by some candidates meant they created a sense of drama and suspense in their work. Here, something I really liked here, the effective planning by some candidates meant they created a sense of drama and suspense in their work. And I've heard many people say, you don't have time in an exam to plan. And that's great. But honestly, if you plan your response and write your response, it takes the same, if not less time than not planning your response, writing your response, getting halfway through, realizing that you need to change what you're doing, starting again, not being sure of what you're doing, losing track of what you're saying halfway through, and then essentially failing because you didn't answer the question. And by the time you realize that you weren't actually answering the question, if you do realize it, you have run out of time for this question. And so I say that if you when you approach this question, do at least some planning, whether this is a little mind map or whether this is a little point form list. I want to see, you want the opening of a story called The Voice about an answer phone message that someone received from a complete stranger. Now, this is more in Katashka's wheelhouse. Let's be real about that. But we want the opening of a story. So I want to know, what techniques are you going to use? So I'm going to note down in my planning. So for my planning, I'm going to look at what techniques. So what techniques could I use for an opening? Okay, so I could start, for instance, in media res. So to start in media res is to start in the middle of the story. I could make it. I really love to start with dialogue. And then when I'm starting with dialogue, I could either start in media res. I don't know if I'm actually spelling media res correctly, but just love me anyway. So I could either start in media res, or it could be the beginning of a conversation. Okay. Now I would need a character in every story. I would need a setting. I would need some ideas on where it's going. So let me just note down here some ideas on where it's going. I like to write a couple of points, like I would write maybe 3 or 4 different directions it could take. Okay. And then I would choose one. How would I choose one? Honestly, I would just choose one based on chaos. The reason I write down 3 or 4 is so that I don't try to combine them all. Now remember, you have 400 words. You don't have you don't have that much space. Okay. So media res, for those who aren't in the know, media res is when you start in the middle of a scene. Okay. In the middle of something. In the middle of the action. Okay. So let's think of okay, I can only think of movies that I don't know if it's going to be relevant to everyone here. So some ideas for where it's going. I would also create a character. Okay, now my character, who is my main character? What is the number one character I should always create? That's my narrator. Okay, my narrator could be first person. So, sorry, just sending my son out. Okay, so I could do first person, second person, or third person. Who wants to give me a quick definition of first, second, and third person? Okay, has anyone ever read a book like that with a U? Anyone ever done a choose your own adventure? My first second person book I read was actually a Goosebumps when I was a kid. I don't know if Goosebumps is still a thing. So third person is going to be like she, they, right? So that's my third person, and I'm going to talk just now about the effects of each, but I'll do that in my analysis of the piece. So then we've got our setting. So basically the world that it is in. Okay. I don't know why I created that there. Okay, so for my character, I need a narrator. I would also need anyone for the narrator to interact with. Okay. I also just want to note here with my narrator, I can have omniscient. Anyone know what omniscient is? Yes, yes. But I can also be a character in the story myself, looking at it retroactively, in retrospect. If I have studied everything, then I could tell a past tense narrative where I could be an omniscient narrator to a degree. Do you know what I mean? So if I'm talking about omniscient, yeah. No, not. It's got nothing to do with their level of involvement. It's got to do with their level of knowledge. Okay, so omniscient is so when I'm looking at narrative perspective, these actually fall under narrative perspective for me. Make them. That would be first, second, third person. This is narrative knowledge. I could be a narrator narrating what is inside my own head. And theoretically, I know what's happening inside my own head, right? Now, if I have a high level of self-awareness, I could be an omniscient narrator inside my head. And if I have a low level of self-awareness, I would have a limited perspective. And so your narrative knowledge is, whether it's omniscient or limited perspective, is really just related to how much knowledge do I have as the narrator And how much work are you going to have to do as the reader to discover these things? And now this shouldn't take you much time because you're just going through and you're like, okay, these are my characters. Remember, we spoke to you about actually creating the character beforehand. So you create your main character beforehand, your narrator at least, so that when you get your exam, you're just writing as your narrator. So if your narrator, and to create your narrator, you just decide, you look at what makes this person interesting. Tell me something about them, because every person needs to have something interesting. Otherwise, they're probably just an NPC. You want them to have some kind of depth behind that what you see that you don't actually necessarily need to reveal. And so the narrator will have the voice. And part of the reason we tell you to create a narrator who is not necessarily you, it could be you. But the reason we tell you to create someone who is not you is because very often you have not developed your own voice yet. So it is easier to create a voice when you're like, okay, I know this person speaks like this person speaks like this, than it is to develop that voice for yourself and have it perfectly honed in. It took me years and years and years of writing to actually develop my voice. And I have found very few students over the years who had a well-developed voice by the time they were 18. And so their voice was a little bit shaky. And so because of that, they struggled to be consistent throughout their thing. So these are just some ideas on what you can say in the planning. Now, do you notice how with the planning, I'm not just telling you this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. It's far deeper than that, because in order to get a sophisticated mark for this, you need to have a deeper look at what the different implications are of what you're saying. Does that make sense? So merely telling me what's going to happen in the story does not it is not seen in your planning. Effective planning, that is planning, but effective planning looks at more than the story, and it looks at the the drama and suspense. So how am I going to create drama and suspense? I can do that through my character. I can do that through my dialogue. I can do that through media res. I can basically start in media res, and I can start in the middle of a scene and my reader has no idea what's happening. And they are just thrown into this moment of drama, and someone is about to die, and they're not even sure whether they agree that this person is about to die. Don't go so dramatic. You can go so dramatic, but like, they're not sure whether they agree because they don't actually know what's going on. And that can be one way of creating suspense, making sure the reader doesn't actually know, like not letting the reader know what's going on. But another way of creating suspense is to build it slowly. So it's about the decisions you make and following through on those decisions. And then question B, as you'll see, is how well did you follow through on your decisions? Did you actually make decisions? It doesn't ask you those questions, but those are the questions you're asking yourself. Did I make decisions to actually understand this and get to this point? So some stronger responses showed an immediate engagement with the question by focusing attention on building drama and suspense, creating vivid settings and tense atmospheres. So we want number one, vivid setting. We want tense atmospheres. It is never a good look when thunder welcomes your arrival. The dark, cold, and fearsome house stood in front of Mark. He lowered his glance from his phone up to the highest tower of the stone Edwardian house. It beckoned him to look straight at it, and as if it demanded respect. So the voice aspect of the question should have been an important focus for candidates. So oh wait, sorry, I messed up here by putting a comma instead of a stop. The voice. So this should be important. And here I want you to note that the voice gives you a character. Okay? They are referencing a character. because there is a voice coming from somewhere. Where is that voice coming from? Whether that voice is a house, a clock tower, a person, God, Satan, a demon, a snake, they are a character. So you need to be creating a voice for the protagonist and the voice for the speaker on the answer phone message. So there is this answer phone message, and I want my voice as the person, but I also want, I could have a voice for the protagonist, a voice for the answer phone message, and I could have a voice for the narrator. If the narrator and the protagonist are not the same person. So stronger responses excelled in this regard, with some quite sinister openings being born out of a simple but eerie setting. So simple but eerie setting is a possibility. One candidate skillfully created a convincing, childlike voice for a young girl who picks up a message while she's all alone in her parents' home. Through carefully chosen lexis, the reader can discern that all is not well for the child. Okay, so here I want to bring your attention to that. Carefully chosen lexis. What I want you to note there is that we mustn't be too on the nose. And the more you apply these things, and the more of this you have used in your own writing, the more there is to actually analyze. So one candidate skillfully created a conventional references to a dripping spot from the ceiling, and Mummy had stopped moving, coupled with the total innocence of the girl from the ceiling. Girl made for a gripping read. The climax was achieved when the girl, with her tiny fingers, heard the voice on the machine telling her she had been selected to play a game called Eternal Happiness. Now, I want you to note here just something that I don't know if I have mentioned this before, but even though it is the beginning of a story, there still needs to be some kind of narrative arc. You still need to have a climax to your beginning. Okay. So stronger responses ended their story openings with successful cliffhangers. Because a story opening would usually end with a cliffhanger, right? You don't want it to conclude right after the beginning. And the reason the cliffhanger is important is because it shows that you have understood the assignment. Okay. So to quote one of these effective responses, strange. He had just come home from his office job, no wife, no kid, no parents. He certainly didn't have any friends. Who would be sending him a voicemail? No one could think of. No one he could think of. There was no one, and that creates some suspense in that, right? And it really does add drama to have all these questions, all like this the short, just strange as a full sentence. No wife, no kids, no parents. That triadic structure adds suspense. It adds drama. Now, this is what people did wrong. People who did badly would write the narrative would write in a narrative form, but their structure was bad. So they wouldn't have paragraph breaks. They would describe the scenario and they'd kind of like lead you into it instead of telling the story. And so they might even use very, very long sentences. And long sentences don't really add to the drama and suspense because they slow the pace so much. They do add a bit of confusion depending on how you do it, but they're not really achieving their purpose. And so those who did badly would usually be those who write about 200 words. So it's important that you're not spending too long on exposition before, like, exposition is explanation and stuff, before you introduce the idea of the answer phone, because that is the main idea of the question. So you need to make sure then also that your tense is correct. You can't be switching from past to present and then back again. You need to stick to one thing. If you use dialogue, you need to make sure that you understand punctuation. You need to understand paragraphing. So if you are going to dialogue when there is a new person speaking, every time there's a new person speaking, you start a new paragraph. I don't care if you feel like you've got too many paragraphs. New person, new topic. So new person, new topic, new scene. I can't remember exactly what all of them are. They're tip top. So um so if you're another thing, if you're going to use adjectives, you need to try sticking away from cliches and overused used adjectives, and you need to understand the adjective you're using. Um because even if you've got a really great response, using weak adjectives, using weak verbs, not using language well is really going to take away from your story.